Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, we thank you for the blessing of this gorgeous day, of the opportunity to experience the warmth of the spring and the renewal that is coming into our community here in Arlington and perhaps in every place in which we worship you this day. We thank you in particular for the warmth that you're drawing in our hearts and the ways you're drawing us closer to you among the topsy-turvy nature of this world and all that we may be facing. Help us to cast our gaze upon you. Help us to find our true north. Help us, O Lord, to recognize that while we may be at a loss, you are not. Speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. Make the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable before you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, so we are in the sermon series called Ride of Your Life. We're looking at amusement park rides and exploring what they may teach us about our life with God. And it turns out they might actually teach us a few things, depending on how we look at them. We looked at the carousel and the things go round and around and around the first week in the way that we sometimes, unfortunately, repeat unhealthy patterns over and again, and how in the season of Lent create healthy patterns instead to replace the unhealthy ones. We looked next week at the drop zone and recognized that it can be terrifying, but there are some things that we need to let go of and just let them be and not pick them back up again as we go on in the ride. And last week we talked about the water rides in the amusement parks and the ways in which God is inviting us to identify our mission and identity in God, to get wet with the Lord, to get immersed within the mercy of God's forgiveness and washed by God's grace. And today I want to talk about the pinnacle of all amusement park rides, the most important ride, the one, every other ride is just a palate cleanser for these rides, and that's the roller coasters. I love me some roller coasters. This is the essence. I mean, listen, if an amusement park doesn't have great roller coasters, I'm just not happy there. I have come to love them. In fact, I am so dedicated to the art of preaching and being with you as a pastor and being relevant that yesterday I took my family to Six Flags. So, merely as an academic enterprise, just for sermon preparation, and rode 7 roller coasters, 5 in the front seat, with my son, who is a roller coaster junkie as well, a 15-year-old high schooler. And whenever I'm like, we could get on this ride 3 times more if we sat in the back, he's like, no, it's a different experience. You need to be in the front. And Nicholas is right. That's exactly the case. And the rides that we went on were extraordinary. Now, people have their own preferences about roller coasters. Some are terrified by them and hate them and will never ride on them. Okay. And then there's those who love them. And among those who love them, there are those who prefer the up and the downs and those who prefer the loops and the twists. I'm of the latter sort. Now, my friend Mike Bennett, who's a pastor at Rehoboth United Methodist Church and has joined with us in ministries from various times, he likes the ups and the downs of the roller coaster. So he's wrong. I like the twists and the loops. I like being shaken all up. Now, he's a bigger guy than me, and he says it kind of rattles him a little bit. Well, you got to be strong. It's a great way to experience the ride. It's good to experience the loops, but however you look at it, many people well before me have used roller coasters, both the ups and the downs, and the twists and the loops as an illustration for life itself. There are ups and downs. There are twists and right turns and left turns and loops that you don't even expect and that sometimes you're simply not ready for. And there's somebody along the ride in the car who's going, yes, hands raised, ready to embrace it. And there's somebody who's white-knuckling it, screaming bloody murder, begging to get off the ride. Which is it for you today? And I pray that you're on a ride with God, a ride of faith, a journey of faith. And even in a ride with God and a journey of faith, there are at times ups and downs, and there's also turns and twists and things that you don't expect God to say or do or move in your life. And sometimes the off-putting nature of that brings some people to say, I'm going to step back from faith because God is not one that I can really anticipate what God's going to do in my life. But I want to encourage us to hands raised. I want to encourage us in our walk with Christ during the season of Lent to say, I'm going to embrace the journey of that. Not embrace every bad thing that happens in life, but to embrace that it's not the end of the story, and that perhaps there is a joy that God wants to bring to us in life as well as the difficulties. There's this narration of roller coasters throughout the scriptures of wild things that are happening that people don't expect, that they think one thing's going to happen and a different thing happens over and over again. And the one I was drawn to in preparation for the sermon is found in the book of Samuel. Actually, 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel were originally one big book of Samuel. We find this narrative in 2 Samuel there towards the beginning in chapter 4. And the people of Israel have left the Sinai Peninsula. They've received the Ark of the Covenant. It seems like every week I'm talking about an Ark of some sort. They've received the Ark of the Covenant. They've made it across the Jordan River and into the promised land that had been promised to them and foretold to them. And they get there and they have various encounters. And judges rise up, people like Samson, and they do battle with the Philistines, and they help the people of Israel to know what the right paths are, and they fail over and over again. And where we find ourselves in 2 Samuel is kind of in between the judges and when kings like Saul and David arrive here later in the book. And there's prophets who are kind of helping to run the show. A guy named Eli is the head prophet, if you will, of the people of Israel at this time. And they're just going around, and they have the Ark of the Covenant, and they are storing it in a place called Shiloh, which is kind of like their de facto capital for the time being before they eventually get to a place called Jerusalem years later. And the Philistines have decided to mount up war against the Hebrew people, against the Israelites. And so in chapter 4, we hear that. In those days, the Philistines mustered for war against Israel, in chapter 4 of 2 Samuel. And what happens next is a roller coaster of epic proportions, greater even than the Superman in Six Flags or the Hulk in Orlando. It is quite a ride, and it really shakes people up, and they have a hard time finding solid ground and how to walk with certainty after it. And the story goes like this. The Philistines are encamped at Aphek, and they go, we're going to march against the Israelites. The Israelites are at a place called Ebenezer, where stones had been raised up centuries before, and they set out their troops. And the two troops come, and they meet in the middle, and they face each other. Now, the Philistines are a peculiar people. We're not entirely certain of their epistemology, their history. We know that they are said to have come from Crete, so they're Cretans, maybe mixed with Egyptians. They have a history of what Israel had done back in slavery. They remember some of those narratives, and they're like a seafaring people. Some say they are kind of like Vikings who come and camp along the coast and are ready for battle. It's the Iron Age, so they have strong weapons, no longer the soft bronze swords. And when they do battle, there are many dead bodies left afterwards. These are epically huge battles now able to be experienced in horror. And the Philistines say, we're taking out the Hebrews. We're going to just wipe them out of this land, and we'll own all of it. And so they come and they meet for that first battle. And in that battle, 4,000 Israelites laid dead. They routed the Hebrew people. And so the Hebrew people are going, what is going on? What, are we even going to survive this? What are we going to do? And some of the people in their panic, and they're going through the click, 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 and they're going, how am I going to survive? What are we going to do? How are we going to get through this ride? And they're panicking. You know, people who do that as you're going up the slow grind of life and are constantly maybe panicking. Do you know anybody who's always in a state of holy terror? You know anybody like that? Are you somebody like that? I pray for a greater sense of peace. And I would say that through God, that can actually be accomplished. But what the Hebrew people were doing at this stage, They didn't say, well, let's go worship God, or let's go pray to God, or let's do this thing and appeal to the Lord for direction and discernment and how we might have not been faithful or how we need to change in ourselves. They said, look, I know what we need. We need to grab God from Shiloh and bring him here. And so the people all decide, go get the Ark of the Covenant that's being stored in Shiloh, bring it here, and if we have the Ark of the Covenant here, God with us, then we cannot lose and we'll go. Now, they didn't mind asking in prayer if God said this is a good idea. They didn't actually engage in faith. They just decided, oh, if I put on a cross necklace or if I have a Bible somewhere on the shelf in my living room, then I'm protected in some way. Not a relationship, but more of a superstition. Not that having a Bible on the shelf or a cross on the neck is bad, as long as it's a sign that actually you're engaging in relationship with the one that represents and it is shared through it. But they're not doing that. And so they say, well, bring the Ark of the Covenant here, and then we will rout them. And they do. They get the Ark there, and the Philistines are at a distance for the second battle, and they look up and they go, oh, that's that Ark. They brought their God to be with us, be with them. They're going to march into battle against us with their God. And do you remember what their God did? That all those plagues back in Egypt, all those horrible, we are not going to survive. And the Philistine army enters into a panic. And somewhere along the lines, the generals of the Philistine army say, everybody just fight for your life because we are about to be just destroyed and wiped off the face of the earth. Make sure you fight as if that you're the last man standing. Make sure that you do as much harm as you can against the Israelites and that maybe we could survive. And so they get themselves into, they get riled up to engage as ferociously as possible. Meanwhile, the Israelites on the other side are going, well, we've got the Ark of the Covenant, so we can't lose. God is on our side, and we're ready to destroy them. And let's go into battle. And with great confidence, the Israelites enter into battle. What happens? I'm glad you asked. What happens is the Israelites are ferociously destroyed. 30,000 rather. First time 4,000. The second battle, 30,000. And they have the Ark of the Covenant. And so what happens is the Ark of the Covenant gets taken by the Philistine army. Taken away from the Hebrew people. But this is the same kind of experience as the disciples seeing Jesus crucified. This is like God is dead. He's not with us. We are no more. We are no longer a people. This is what led us through the Sinai Peninsula. This is what guided us into Israel. This is what is a sign of God with us. Holds the ark. The ark holds the Ten Commandments and the staff of Aaron and the manna, jars of manna. It is a symbol of all the ways in which God is with us. And now the Philistines take it with them. And along with that, the two sons of Eli, the great prophet at the time, they are in the battle, and these are not good guys. The scriptures earlier refers to them as rascals who would steal the sacrifices made to God even while it's being offered, steal what people were offering in tribute to what God had done in their lives, just take it for themselves. These are rascals, and these two rascals, their names are Phinehas and his brother. You know the name, right? It's not Ferb. It's not Phineas and Ferb. It's Phinehas and Hophni. Hophni and Phinehas, they were there in the battle, and they are killed. And somebody runs back to Shiloh to tell old Eli what has happened. And when he hears that the ark is taken and that his two sons have been killed in battle, he falls over, breaks his neck, and dies. This story is getting worse and worse and worse. It gets worse again. Then the daughter-in-law of Eli, one of the wives of his sons, she who is pregnant finds out that her husband has been killed. Her brother-in-law, her father-in-law has just fallen to his death. The ark has been stolen, and the Israelite troops have been decimated. And she cries out, and the first thing she mentions is the ark is taken. Then she mentions that her husband is dead, that her father-in-law is dead, and the Israelites are taken. And she decides to name her newborn son, who in the midst of her trauma gives birth at that moment, and she names him Ichabod. which means the glory of the Lord has departed. God's glory is no more. Never name a child Ichabod, just for reference. It's a dark name. And so the Hebrew people are feeling as if that they would rather just get off the ride and just walk down. Just stop the ride entirely. I'm bailing. I'm ready to just depart. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that or seen anybody try to do that. When I was growing up, I remember at the top of roller coasters, there seemed to be a person up there. I didn't really ride them much, but I thought there was a person up there. And I thought to myself, if I get on the ride and I don't like it, then I can ask to get off. Have you ever seen anybody get off? I've never actually seen somebody walk down. What I do know is that having ridden now many roller coasters, I think walking down the stairs at the peak of the roller coaster would be more terrifying than going on the ride. But we don't know that at the moment, right? We're just awash in our terror at those experiences. Well, the Philistine army, they take the Ark of the Covenant. They are victorious. They're overwhelmed with joy. They bring it back to their temple, the temple of Dagon. And I was trying to come up with a joke related to that, but daggone it, I just can't find one. But anyway, so the temple of Dagon, and they have a statue there of the goddess Dagon, and it's standing there, and they put the ark in front of it, kind of being like, here's a present to you, our god Dagon. And they go to bed, and in the morning, Dagon has fallen over and is laid prostrate in front of the ark as if it's bowing to the Lord God Almighty. The people come out and they're like, oh, that's awful. And they set it back up, and they go to bed, and the next night, and they wake up the next morning, they come out, and the head is popped off, the hands have popped off, and only the torso is left. And they go, this is kind of scary. And they were like, maybe we should take it out of the temple. And so they take it out of the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, and they put it inside the town. And they put it in the town, and a couple days go by, and the people go, do you have spots? I have these spots growing all over these little things. You too? And they're growing, and they're like tumors, and they're literally called tumors, and they're growing, and the people are becoming ill. It's like the Ark of the Covenant is radioactive. Chernobyl has taken place in their town, and they're like, get it out of here. And so they do that. They go from Ashdod to Gad, and from Gad down to Ekron, and from place to place to place, they go, yes, we'll take the Ark of the Covenant. This is a sign of our championship, and it's made of gold, and we've got all this wealth now. And after a couple of days, and the people being filled with tumors, they go, somebody take this away from us. And it's kind of a symbol that you can't control God. Right? I mean, if you think back, the Hebrew people had been like, we'll just use God as a crutch. We'll just say God is on our side, and God has to be on my side. If I wear this, do that, then I've got God. And God's like, yes, so I'm bigger than that. And I'm actually for what's right, not just for what you're for at this particular moment. And the Philistine army, they say, hey, if we can possess God, then we've got God's power. And yeah, you've got God's power, but be careful, because that may not be a good thing compared to what you're doing at that moment. God may be convicting you that what you're doing is actually not good. It may, in fact, be evil. And the people kept saying, you know what, we can't control, so get God out of here. And it goes from place to place and place. And finally they say, what are we going to do? Nobody will take the ark anymore. Like, no town wants it. No place, no person, let's give it back to the Israelites. And so they make up a plan to give it back to the Israelites, but then nobody will take it back to the Israelites. So they say, we'll get 2 oxes, we'll put them together, we'll create a sled, we'll put the Ark of the Covenant on it, we have to bring gifts. We have to make amends for what we've done. We've tried to control their God. So they decide to melt down their gold and give them a guilt offering, is what they call it. And they make out of the gold little tumors to symbolize what they went through. Tumors. They made gold tumors and gold mice to represent each of the towns and how they wanted to flee from their God. And they make mice and tumors. They put it on the ark. They take the ark. They put it on the sled. They put the sled on and they say, oxen go. And then they watch as the oxen go. And they see that it finally gets to an Israelite village. And the Israelites are like, they returned it? And the Philistine people were like, yay, we got rid of it. This is, more twists and turns than you can imagine, right? And so this is how the Israelites did not ultimately lose the Ark of the Covenant, but had for a period of time. Oh boy, what an experience that would have been. And there are, for me, what this reminds me of, and again, we are Methodists, so we love to emphasize the fact that God, out of God's love, gives us free will, and God does. But at the end of the day, you can't control God. You are not able to make God into a puppet to discern what God will do. And there are ways along the road of life, the roller coaster of life, that turning in directions you wish they wouldn't turn. And the thing is, you can't decide the turns. You and I are not architects of the roller coaster. We're along for the ride. What we do makes a huge difference. Make good decisions. Try to better the lives of others. I'm not saying don't exercise your free will, but as you do that, remember that ultimately you're not in control. Neither am I, and neither is any other human being. And we all will experience twists and turns and loops and highs and lows that we didn't anticipate. And the question for us is, are we going to engage in those white-knuckled screaming in holy terror, or do we say, okay, God, I'm along on it? Because how we experience it makes all the difference in the world. It's the same ride for the person behind you screaming, get me off of this ride, as you who's lifted your hand saying, okay, let's go. It's the same ride. And yet the experience of it is dramatically different. Years ago, for actually most of my life, I did not ride roller coasters. So it's confession time. I was terrified of them. I'd been on a roller coaster when I was like 7 years old and had a very bad experience. I wanted to walk down. They wouldn't let me off. It was awful. And I said, never again. I don't like roller coasters. And then I got married. I had my first child. And my wife and her family says, well, we do Disney. We're going to Disney. And I said, okay, we're going to Disney, but I don't ride roller coasters. They said, okay. So we go to Magic Kingdom, and we're there, and we do these. I do the carousel, and I do the teacups, and I do things like that. And they're like, hey, there's this other ride here. You want to go on it? And I said, as long as it's not a roller coaster. They say, no, it's in this building. So I walk in, and I get in line, and there's a moving sidewalk going up and up and up, and this is a pretty big ride, but I can't see anything, and there's like hundreds of people behind me, so there's no getting off. And I'm like, is this a roller coaster? And they're like, no. And, there was a combination of like pride, and mostly just pride that said, I'm not going to bail, but they get me in the seat, and this is Space Mountain. Maybe you've heard of it, which is a roller coaster. And they said, come on, give it a try. And I say, okay. And I began that ride like this. If I just squeeze hard enough, tighten my insides, close my eyes, grip the handle rail hard enough, I'll be able to survive. By the way, that does not help you to survive the ride. And then we started going, and I got to, you can't see everything because it's inside and it has lights and it has different twists and turns. And the fact that I couldn't tell what was coming next was a great benefit to me. I'm glad that my first roller coaster that I fell in love with roller coasters through, and as an adult, was one that was basically in the dark. Because it reminded me that, sometimes it's best to not know what's coming up ahead. And to just say, maybe I have a choice to embrace this as a joy versus experience it as a horrible terror. And so I went from going, no, to yeah. I can still today remember going from screaming no to going yay on that ride. And ever since, I got to tell you, I love me a roller coaster. And I welcome the twists. And although I pray that you and I, none of us experience the horrible twists of life, of loss, yet we probably will at some point, because that's the roller coaster of life. I pray that there's not real lows in addition to the highs, but in all likelihood, there will be. And so I pray that you recognize that the architect of the bride has not designed it for your demise, for your destruction, for God so loved the world. And when it looks like God is defeated, when he's dead upon the cross, remember that Easter is coming, and because he lives, you can face tomorrow. That we can engage in that ride of life, the roller coaster of life, with a sense of trust and joy, and not just unholy terror. Thanks be to God. Amen.